Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought a crumbling country club in the Arizona desert, I thought I was rescuing a forgotten relic. I didn't expect war with a suburban tyrant named Karen, armed with keyrings, fake claims, and HOA rage. What followed was a battle of deeds, law, and underground plumbing. I've always believed that property tells a story, not just of land and structures, but of ego, history, and misplaced entitlement. The one I bought had plenty of all three. After retiring from pro football, I poured my earnings into long-term assets. Not stocks, not startups, land, especially in Arizona where everything seems to get paved over twice a decade. 3 years ago, I picked up what used to be a private country club on the outskirts of Silver Creek Vista, a half-defunct suburban community built on beige stucco dreams and HOA delusions. The club had gone belly up years earlier after a fraud scandal involving the original developer and a failed real estate syndicate. The land changed hands twice, finally hitting the auction block in a tax sale. I got it for a steal. The place was a wreck. The Olympic-sized pool was filled with rainwater, leaves, and possibly an alligator. The tennis courts had weeds punching through the asphalt like nature's middle finger. The gym was a concrete shell with broken mirrors and a roof leak that had long since given up pretending it wasn't a waterfall. But the bones were strong, the utilities ran deep, and the location, prime. Just a stone's throw from the Silver Creek homes, and, critically, no formal attachment to the HOA that managed them. I had my lawyer confirm that a dozen times. Over the next 18 months, I invested $1.4 million into renovations, new plumbing, upgraded electrical, solar integration, resurfaced courts, rebuilt pool infrastructure, a full-blown indoor fitness center with air conditioning that wouldn't fail in the Arizona heat. All of it paid in cash, run through a couple of LLCs for liability purposes. It wasn't just a vanity project. I had a plan. Private memberships, family-friendly tournaments, a rentable venue for school teams and weekend events, an income-generating asset. I wasn't naive about the neighborhood. I knew Silver Creek Vista had gotten used to using the grounds as their personal playground over the past 20 years. Their kids learned to swim there. Their old folks did yoga near the rusty fence line. But there were no contracts, no easements, no money changing hands. Just tradition. That didn't mean a damn thing to me. When we finished the last round of renovations, I locked the place down tight. Brand new electronic gate system with key fob entry, security cameras across every entrance, posted signs at every corner of the fence, private property, no trespassing, membership required. I hired a rotating guard team out of Scottsdale, former cops and Marines, not some sun-baked teenager in a polo. Everything above board, everything insured. The trouble started the morning after the new locks went live. I was walking the perimeter with the site manager, checking signage placement and finalizing the pool house access schedule. We were going over entry protocols when a woman in a lavender pantsuit stomped up the driveway like she was storming the beaches of Normandy. She was dragging two younger people behind her. Both wore name tags that said, HOA Board Intern. God help us all. She stopped 10 feet from the gate and raised a jangling keyring like a sheriff demanding entrance. "You need to unlock this gate," she barked. I looked at her for half a second before responding. "And you are?" "Karen Delacroix, president of the Silver Creek Vista Homeowners Association. We've come to assess the status of community amenities. This gate is unlawfully locked." I actually laughed. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "this isn't a community amenity. This is privately owned land. I bought it 3 years ago, and it's been under construction ever since. You are currently trespassing." Her nostrils flared so wide I could see her sinuses. "This property has historically served the Silver Creek residents. We have hosted barbecues here, charity events, swimming lessons. You can't just steal it away and put up walls like it's a prison yard." I crossed my arms. "Nobody stole anything. Your HOA never owned this land. There was no lease, no service agreement, no formal relationship. You were using it for free because no one stopped you. That's over now." Karen turned to one of her interns. "Take pictures. We're documenting this." I smiled. "Be my guest. Just make sure to get the sign in the frame, the one that says no trespassing." She looked like she wanted to lunge at me, but instead she spat the words, "We'll be speaking to our attorneys." "You haven't heard the last of this." As she stormed off, dragging her junior entourage behind her, I leaned over to my site manager and muttered, "Well, that escalated predictably." He didn't laugh. That evening, the complex's main inbox was flooded with messages, accusations, demands, even a couple of veiled threats. One resident claimed I was privatizing a lifeline of the community. Another said her teenage daughter was traumatized by the inability to swim on demand. There were also noise complaints from people who lived 3 blocks away and hadn't heard a sound in years. Then came the real cherry, a screenshot of a Facebook post from Karen tagging half the HOA, claiming that I had stolen ancestral public land and blocked children from safe recreation. Ancestral, Jesus Christ. The club was built in 1997. By the end of the day, my property was the center of a neighborhood outrage campaign. Karen had kicked off something bigger than she probably even intended, and I had the sinking feeling this wasn't over. The next morning, I found her waiting by the main gate again. Same lavender pantsuit, different pair of sunglasses, same raging entitlement. She wasn't alone this time. There were 5 other people with her, standing awkwardly behind her like a delegation from the Republic of Delusion. 2 had clipboards. One wore a badge that read Security Committee, though the man looked like he'd lose a wrestling match to a deck chair. I didn't bother going through the guards. I walked straight up and leaned on the fence from the inside. Karen pointed a finger at me like she was conducting a hostile takeover. "You're going to unlock this gate right now." "No, I'm not," I said, smiling. "But good morning. I have master keys," she said, rattling her absurdly overstuffed ring of them like some kind of HOA dungeon warden. "This property has been used by our residents for over 2 decades. You don't have the right to just shut us out." I motioned to the sign posted a foot from her head. "I do, actually. This is private property. It always has been. Your HOA never owned it, never paid to maintain it, and has no legal claim to any part of it. You've just been squatting privileges on someone else's land for years." One of her clipboard lackeys stepped forward. "We believe the community has established a right of access through consistent historical use." "You believe wrong," I said, "and you're trespassing." Karen's face twisted like a compression spring ready to snap. "We will not be bullied off our own land." I let that hang in the air a second before responding. "Karen, you and your board can scream about heritage and tradition all you want, but the law is about facts. And the facts are this: I own this property. You do not. You never have. And unless someone shows up with a deed proving otherwise, this conversation is over." She made a show of turning to the security cameras and waving. "This is being recorded. We will be filing a formal complaint with the town council." "Please do. My lawyer loves paperwork." She glared at me, her eyes twitching like she was calculating how many neighborhood email blasts it would take to ruin my life. "This isn't over. The board will be voting on emergency action." "Let me guess," I said. "You're going to file a lawsuit and accuse me of stealing public amenities?" That hit too close to home. She didn't respond, just grabbed her phone, snapped a dozen more photos of the locked gates, and turned on her heel. By noon, things had escalated in exactly the way I expected and dreaded. My office received a formal letter from the Silver Creek Vista HOA claiming I was in violation of neighborhood access norms and demanding immediate restoration of public recreational services. It was 4 pages of amateur legal gibberish written by someone who had watched too many courtroom dramas and thought precedents were set on Facebook. Later that day, I got a heads up from my assistant. Our name and business entity were now being dragged through every local social media thread, Nextdoor post, and mom blog within a 5-mile radius. Karen had labeled me a corporate predator, which was hilarious, considering I was the only one actually paying to fix the damn place. My site manager reported that a group of teens had tried to hop the back fence around midnight. Security footage showed them running away laughing after tripping an alarm. I called their bluff and turned the footage over to local PD with a formal trespassing report. No arrests, but it sent a message. Then came the noise complaints. Apparently, Karen had encouraged residents to submit daily calls to the zoning board, claiming we were operating a commercial venue without a permit, hosting loud events, and disrupting the character of the neighborhood. The truth, we hadn't even opened yet. I met with my legal team again and had them pull every city permit, site classification, zoning exemption, and use authorization I had filed. Everything was ironclad. I was 5 steps ahead, and she didn't even know the game we were playing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't just petty posturing anymore. Karen wasn't just throwing tantrums. She was building a case, Brick by Crooked Brick. I've seen people like her before. They don't bluff. They push, twist, manipulate, and weaponize ignorance until someone bends. And I wasn't going to bend. The lawsuit hit me like a brick through a stained glass window. Dramatic, unnecessary, and clearly meant to piss someone off. I was halfway through a meeting with a local high school swim coach about potential lane rentals when my assistant walked in holding an envelope like it contained anthrax. "You've been served," she said, deadpan. The papers were from the Silver Creek Vista Homeowners Association, filed with the county court. 5 dense pages of legal fantasy dressed up as civil action. They were suing me. The core claim? That my recent unilateral privatization of community recreational assets constituted an unlawful deprivation of historical public access. They wanted the court to recognize the sports complex, my private property, as a public easement zone subject to HOA oversight and community benefit. They were demanding the restoration of full access to all facilities and a ruling that would invalidate the contested separation of this parcel from the HOA master plan. Their words. Not mine. There was no master plan. There never had been. I skimmed the attachments. Photos from over a decade ago. Faded snapshots of kids playing on old tennis courts, families grilling near the old pool, a banner for some long-forgotten HOA barbecue, a couple of typed statements from former board members, one of whom was now living in Florida and probably hadn't seen this property in 15 years, claiming there was a gentleman's agreement with previous owners. Gentleman's agreement. Christ. I called my lawyer, Daniel Trumbull, a probate and real estate litigator with the charm of a bloodhound and the temperament of a tax audit. Karen finally lost her mind. I said, "She's suing me for owning something I legally bought." "She's not suing you for ownership," Daniel replied after scanning the docs. "She's suing you for cultural trespass disguised as civil grievance. It's clever in a stupid kind of way. What are our options?" We respond, and we counter hard. Within 24 hours, Daniel had a team digging through every piece of paper connected to the property. Title transfers, zoning board approvals, deed history, subdivision maps, bankruptcy filings from the club's collapse. I called my insurance company and flagged the situation. We weren't just playing defense. We were building a wall made of notarized facts. One thing stood out immediately. The property had been officially severed from all community covenants 12 years ago during the foreclosure process of the original developer. The land had been considered an orphan parcel held by the county before it was auctioned. The HOA had no say, no interest, no jurisdiction. The county records were clear. There had never been a formal incorporation of the sports complex into the HOA's common assets. It had always been adjacent, never included. That didn't stop Karen from feeding her narrative to anyone who'd listen. I started seeing op-eds in the local HOA newsletter claiming that I had used a legal loophole to steal what was meant for the people. Meant by whom? The bankruptcy court. My lawyer's office got a hold of the subdivision development plans and the original site control agreement from the 90s. I reviewed them myself, page after page. Nothing about recreation rights. Nothing about HOA management of anything outside the residential lots. No shared maintenance agreements. No mention of the sports complex in the HOA charters. Meanwhile, Karen had begun holding what she called community action briefings, basically outdoor therapy circles where she vented her paranoia and encouraged residents to file affidavits about their lived experiences on the property. I got wind that someone was circulating a petition to restore community control of the facility, as if 100 signatures could rewrite a land deed. Daniel laughed when I told him, "Let her collect signatures. All she's doing is handing us a list of people to subpoena." The HOA also sent a request for preliminary injunction. They wanted the court to freeze all operations on the complex until the matter was resolved. Daniel filed a preemptive objection and added a countersuit for attempted interference with a private business. We weren't playing checkers anymore. This was chess, and I owned the board. Still, I knew the fight was going to get messy before it got clean. The breakthrough came from a spreadsheet. Daniel's paralegal was digging through parcel records when she found a quiet footnote in a water rights document, a legacy utility easement connected to an entity called Vista Utility Holdings, LLC. It wasn't registered under Silver Creek Vista. It was under my holding company. I stared at the scanned PDF, not quite believing what I was seeing. "Run that again," I told her. "Whose name is on that easement?" Yours, she confirmed. Well, your LLC's. But yeah, it ties back to the water main that runs underneath the northeast edge of the subdivision. It supplies the clubhouse, the pool, and about 22 homes. HOA territory. I sat back in my chair. That changed everything. Turns out, when I bought the old sports complex, I didn't just acquire tennis courts and a busted locker room. I inherited a tangled mess of infrastructure, legacy lines, partial road access, even an old emergency power tie-in that was still quietly serving part of Silver Creek Vista during monsoon outages. The HOA had been using those utilities for years, completely unaware, apparently, that they no longer own the systems they relied on. Daniel and I started pulling the threads. Water, wastewater drainage, one access road that was technically still listed as privately maintained by adjacent commercial parcel. That parcel, mine. The easements weren't part of the HOA's recorded covenants. They'd been transferred separately during the tax default, buried in annexes nobody at Silver Creek had read since the Bush administration. No one had told them, which meant they never renegotiated access, never paid a dime, never filed contracts or formal usage agreements, just gentlemen's expectations inherited from a previous era. I wasn't just holding the deed to a sports complex anymore. I was sitting on the plumbing beneath their kingdom. I looked at Daniel. They want a fight? Let's give them one. He grinned. Quiet war, loud weapons. We didn't issue threats. Not yet. Instead, we started documenting. I brought in a civil engineer to do a full assessment of the infrastructure overlap. We took drone footage, ran flow tests, and pulled consumption records from the water district. We got a hydrologist to confirm the HOA was drawing directly off lines that terminated on my property. One of their backflow valves had even corroded into my fence. We also discovered something else. The HOA's backup generator, the one that powered their clubhouse and cameras during outages, had a grounding node installed behind my pump house. The last service record was from 9 years ago. No permit. No fee. Karen had waltzed into my facility claiming heritage rights, not knowing she'd built half her precious operations on land she didn't own. The next week, I called in a meeting with my legal team, a utility compliance consultant, and 2 private investigators, one of whom had been quietly interviewing former property managers. We found someone who used to work for the original developer, a guy named Stewart, who remembered the HOA refusing to pay for infrastructure upkeep as early as 2010. They figured if they just kept using it, no one would notice, he said. Free plumbing, free power. That was the HOA dream. Daniel drafted a letter to the court requesting a supplemental evidentiary disclosure. We were preparing a countersuit for unauthorized utility use, unlawful access to private infrastructure, and 5 years of unpaid commercial benefit. At that point, the tone of everything changed. Karen went quiet. The social media smear campaign slowed down. The HOA newsletter suddenly stopped mentioning me by name. They knew, or at least suspected. One morning, I noticed a city worker inspecting one of the backflow meters near my south fence. I walked over, smiled politely, and asked if he had a permit. He didn't. I called the city. The HOA had filed a retroactive request for inspection, claiming it was part of a community compliance audit. I sent them my legal response. Access denied. Private property. Not open to inspection without court order or signed consent. They didn't reply. For the first time since this whole mess began, I had leverage. Real, legal, concrete leverage. They'd come after me with banners and bad law. Now I had them by the plumbing, and I wasn't letting go. The courthouse smelled like mildew and old power. Our hearing was scheduled for 8:30 sharp in a windowless civil courtroom with flickering fluorescent lights and a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I wore a suit I hadn't used since my retirement gala and tried not to crush the seat with my shoulders. Daniel sat next to me with a folder thick enough to kill a small dog. Karen walked in 5 minutes late, flanked by 2 attorneys from a mid-tier suburban law firm that probably specialized in divorce and HOA nuisance claims. She wore a red blazer this time, probably thinking it made her look decisive. To me, it screamed desperation. The judge opened with formalities, acknowledged the filings, and asked if this case could be resolved through mediation. Daniel politely declined. "We believe the facts are sufficiently documented to support summary judgment in our favor," he said. The opposing lawyer mumbled something about community harm and historic presence. Then he launched into a recycled argument about public access expectations, neighborhood tradition, and an unspoken contract with the residents. That's when Daniel stood and dropped the bomb. "Your Honor, we have with us the original site plans, the subdivision zoning map, the deed of ownership, and a full utility report confirming not only that the property has never been included in the HOA's jurisdiction, but that the HOA has, for over a decade, been utilizing infrastructure owned and maintained by my client without any contract payment or permission." He laid the documents out in front of the judge like he was revealing weapons at an arms negotiation. Then came the video. Our IT guy had pulled it from the cameras installed just before we locked the gates. Clean footage of Karen letting herself into the complex with an outdated key, poking around the grounds, giving what looked like a tour to her interns, even trying doors. At one point, she stands in front of a private property, no trespassing sign, and laughs into the camera. Not smart. The judge raised his eyebrows. Daniel continued, "We also have sworn statements from former development managers and water district engineers confirming that the HOA knowingly used private lines and equipment without compensation and attempted to retroactively file inspections to cover their tracks." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. One of her lawyers whispered something. She didn't respond. Then Daniel pulled the last ace. "We're also submitting a counterclaim seeking damages for unauthorized utility use, trespassing, business interference, and reputational harm, totaling approximately $340,000, subject to audit." The room went dead. Quiet. Karen finally spoke, directly to the judge. "This is a vendetta. He's using his money to weaponize paperwork." The judge didn't blink. "Mrs. Delacroix, what you've described is not a legal argument. Please restrict yourself to facts." Their side scrambled. The second lawyer tried to challenge the title validity, claiming there had been irregularities in the tax sale. Daniel responded by submitting the county's certified confirmation of the auction and deed transfer, dated and notarized. The judge glanced at it and sighed. It was over. Everyone in the room could feel it. Before closing the session, the judge looked directly at Karen. "You filed this lawsuit claiming public ownership of a private property, failed to present any documentation to support that claim, and now face significant exposure for unauthorized use of infrastructure you do not own. This case is headed for dismissal and potential counter-liability. I strongly recommend you consider settlement before this proceeds to trial." Karen turned pale. We walked out of the courtroom into the dry Arizona sun with a kind of electric calm. Daniel was already on the phone with the press liaison. I was on mine with the engineering firm preparing to serve formal notices of access termination to the HOA. Karen hadn't just lost the hearing, she'd lost the facade. And the entire neighborhood was about to find out. The notice went out Monday morning just after sunrise. 230 printed letters, each one delivered to every home in Silver Creek Vista. Certified copies, return receipt requested. The letterhead bore the name of my LLC, Vista Utility Holdings, and the content was written in the cold, clinical language of corporate finality. Effective immediately, access to the water main, drainage systems, emergency backup power, and associated utility infrastructure provided via Parcel B-17 was suspended. A 30-day negotiation window was offered, with terms $25,000 per month for full service restoration, plus a retroactive damage fee of $190,000 for unlawful utility consumption spanning the past 5 years. The rest was just logistics. If no agreement was reached, full disconnection procedures would begin on the 31st day. And they did. Within 48 hours, HOA phones were ringing off the hook. Residents wanted answers about why their irrigation systems weren't working, why the clubhouse bathrooms were closed, why the pool had no pressure in the pump line. Karen held an emergency town hall in the school gymnasium where she spent 2 hours blaming greedy developers and predatory contracts. It didn't work. Because I also mailed a second letter, this one directly to each homeowner outside the HOA's knowledge. It included full documentation of the parcel purchase, legal rulings, engineering assessments, and the original deeds showing the HOA never had claim to any of it. I added a friendly line at the end. You are not at fault for your board's failures. You deserve transparency. If your representatives would like to negotiate a fair usage agreement, my door is open. That one hit like a thunderclap. My inbox exploded. Residents, dozens of them, emailed, called, even showed up at the complex requesting tours, asking how they could join directly. Some were furious, others embarrassed. But the message was clear. The HOA had lied to them. By Friday, the HOA's own board was fracturing. 2 members resigned. One went public on Facebook, calling the lawsuit reckless and fraudulent. Karen tried to control the narrative by releasing an official statement claiming that outside actors were attempting to seize community property through intimidation and false legalism. Nobody bought it. Local news picked up the story after someone leaked the courtroom transcripts. Then came the interviews, neighbors appearing on camera, expressing outrage that their water systems had been dependent on an arrangement they never even knew existed. One woman said, "We were led to believe we owned the place. Turns out we were just trespassing with HOA approval." Saturday morning, I stood at the edge of my pool deck, same spot where Karen had screamed at me 2 weeks earlier, and watched as a group of teenagers biked up to the gate. They didn't try to jump the fence this time. They asked if the new club would offer youth swim programs. I told them it would, soon. The next day, my office received a formal letter, not from Karen, but from a newly formed residents' coalition called the Silver Creek Civic Association, independent from the HOA. It was signed by 32 homeowners. They requested a meeting to discuss forming a new service contract directly with Vista Utility Holdings, without Karen's involvement. That's when I knew. The dam had broken. She snapped 3 days later. I don't know whether it was the collapsing HOA, the neighborhood rebellion, or just the weight of her own unraveling narrative, but Karen finally lost control, publicly, dramatically, and stupidly. A technician from the utility company reported that someone had attempted to tamper with the water meter vault behind the clubhouse. Surveillance footage showed Karen at dusk, crowbar in hand, trying to pry open the panel. When confronted by a neighbor, she screamed that she was reclaiming control of stolen assets. She fled the scene before police arrived, but the damage was done, literally and legally. I forwarded the footage to the sheriff's office. Daniel prepared a formal criminal complaint for vandalism, attempted sabotage, and trespassing, but we weren't done, not even close. Our private investigator had been working the background angle for weeks, and the timing was finally right. He had tracked down a paper trail that linked Karen to several shady maneuvers, including falsified board meeting minutes, retroactively altered HOA newsletters, and 2 forged affidavits submitted with the original civil complaint. One of the signatories, dead since 2018, we submitted the dossier to the district attorney's office. 2 days later, detectives knocked on Karen's door. According to witnesses, she refused to answer and had to be escorted out in handcuffs. The neighborhood HOA forum exploded. Part shock, part satisfaction. One neighbor even posted a picture of the arrest with the caption, "HOA power trip canceled." The charges were serious: filing false documents, misuse of community funds, criminal trespass, and attempted destruction of utility infrastructure. No slap on the wrist this time. She was booked and held on bail. News outlets picked it up quickly. The same local reporter who'd covered the court hearing now ran a segment titled, "When an HOA Goes Rogue." My inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, others apologetic, and a few from lawyers representing other communities asking how to deal with their own Karens. It would have been funny if it weren't so damn familiar. Daniel met with the county prosecutor to ensure we handed over every file. The DA confirmed that they would be pursuing felony charges under Arizona statutes related to real estate fraud and abuse of fiduciary authority. If convicted, Karen could face up to 7 years in prison. In the meantime, my countersuit moved forward. The court had already scheduled the damages hearing. With the HOA effectively leaderless and half the board dissolved, they had no meaningful defense left. Their insurance carrier was already in talks to settle the claim. I walked past the front gates of the complex one morning and saw someone had scrawled in chalk across the sidewalk, "Thank you, Trevor." It caught me off guard. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just didn't like being threatened. But it felt good, knowing that the community finally saw who the real enemy had been all along. Karen didn't show up to the damages hearing. Her attorney submitted a letter of withdrawal 2 days prior, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. The judge didn't even flinch. The HOA, or what was left of it, had no one in their corner. Daniel presented the financial records, engineering assessments, footage of infrastructure use, and estimates of damage. The judge ruled in our favor on all counts, $340,000 in compensation. It wouldn't all come from Karen personally, of course. Most of it would fall on the HOA's liability insurer and whatever cash reserves were left in their accounts. But a good chunk was now tied to Karen directly, thanks to the fraud charges and the misappropriation findings. She'd face civil judgments long after the prison door slammed shut. I used part of the settlement to do exactly what I always planned: finish the complex. We tore down the old tennis fences and built shaded pavilions, replaced the cracked basketball courts with new sport-grade flooring, expanded the gym, installed solar panels on the roof, and opened a snack bar run by a local nonprofit. We rebranded it Canyon Edge Athletic Club. We launched family memberships, scholarship slots for student athletes, and weekly water safety classes for kids. Within a month, the waiting list was full. The newly formed Silver Creek Civic Association, completely independent of the defunct HOA, negotiated a fair contract for utility use. They paid their dues, literally and figuratively. We kept things transparent. No more gentlemen's agreements. Everything was inked, certified, and public. As for Karen, she eventually pled out to a reduced sentence, 5 years, with possibility of parole after 36 months. The DA pushed hard, and she was lucky to avoid a full trial. The judge made a point to call her a cautionary tale of private power corrupted by unchecked ego. She didn't appeal. I heard her house was quietly sold at auction a few months later. On the day of our grand reopening, I stood by the pool, watching neighborhood kids cannonball into the deep end while their parents toured the new gym. A local state representative showed up and gave a short speech about community resilience and accountability in governance. I didn't say much, just thanked everyone for coming and pointed at the big new sign above the gate: private property. Respect boundaries. Tyrants not welcome. People cheered. Later that night, I walked the edge of the complex in silence. The sky was painted in orange and violet. The water shimmered, and for the first time in months, there was no tension in my chest, no noise, no threats, no HOA letters, just the sound of sprinklers and the breeze. It wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about protecting what was mine and making sure no one could ever mistake it for anything else again.